There's a verse in this week's Parsha that's often quoted. It has to do with walking in God's footsteps. I'm sure you may have heard it. Achrei Adonai Elchechem telechu. It sounds like a lovely benediction, maybe something you may even seen sewn in on a doily or a pillowcase or something, decorating somewhere. But if you look more closely at where it actually sits, it sits among a story or a collection of verses, I should say, about a prophet who is so charismatic and so wonderful that he gets everybody to follow other gods and kind of pulls everybody away. And this is a test. And the Torah's answer for how do we prevent people from following a charismatic leader who's leading us astray, it's to make sure that you know how to walk in God's footsteps. And the rabbis of the Talmud were bothered, by the way, with the word walk. They decided to ask the question, well, because all rabbis love to ask questions, which is it actually possible for a human being to walk after the divine presence? Does God have feet? Are we walking in God's footsteps literally? There's nobody ahead for sure. Where exactly are we supposed to go? And the answer is, what the rabbis teach us further, is that God doesn't have a body. You don't walk after that body. You walk following each of the ethical precepts that Judaism lays out. God's qualities, God's habits. God clothed the naked, so guess what? We are supposed to clothe the naked. God visits the sick, and I'm sure you can imagine the list goes on. So do we. God comforts the mourners. Our job is also to comfort mourners. God buries the dead. You get the idea. Rashi takes that whole tradition and compresses all of that into 4 words. Gmol chasadim, kpul metim, bechor cholim. Do acts of gemilut chasadim, Do acts of loving kindness, bury the dead, and visit the sick, just as the Holy One did it. That's the tradition's great move. And I don't want to rush past it. It's important. Judaism took an abstract question and made it concrete. What is it that we're supposed to do? We provide a meal. We support a grieving family. We bury the dead. And you want to know how to walk after God? We find somebody who's cold and give them a jacket. It's not a metaphor for a religious life, in a way. It is a religious life. Every one of us, of course, have had moments where we've done that. We have seen somebody in need and gone after them and tried to meet their need. But there's more than just walking in God's footsteps in that verse. It says, if we, and just to get granular into the Hebrew and the words, which I'm sure some of you love it when I do, tilchu, walk after, tiru, revere, tishmoru, guard the commandments, tishamu, listen to God's voice, ta'avdu, serve, and tidbak, cling. A number of commentators, by the way, noticed that this is not just a list, it's a sequence. The Balet Rit Arim reads it as a ladder. One climbs rung to rung until arriving at the highest rung of all, which is Deveknus, to become close in attachment to God. The Sifrei Kohen reads the same way, and the commentary that I read this week in JTS also puts it plainly. Faith is a skill that requires effort and develops in stages. Which means the verse isn't describing ethics specifically. It's describing a relationship and the stages in which a person becomes capable of being in a relationship with God. Nobody develops this more beautifully, in my opinion, than Rabbeinu Bachya, one of the early Musar teachers. Bachya says 3 things. First, when the verse says, V'oto tirau, revere God, he's not saying, do not try to investigate God's essence. Rather, assess God's manifest actions. You'll never know what God is, but you can see how God acts. Profoundly humbling theology if you really think about it. He also talks about devuk, or cleanliness of God, doesn't happen on the mountaintop. Rather, it happens in his words, even when you're preoccupied with matters other than Torah, even when you're earning your living, you can choose to still have God on your mind. You don't have to totally withdraw to have a spiritual experience. You can wash the dishes and still feel God's presence near you. God can even be in the carpool line at school. I wonder with some angry parents, but there's that possibility. And the third one, according to Rabbeinu Bachya, and I think this kind of reframes the verse even more so, and it suggests "Vu tibakin," and God shall do, and to God shall cling, may not be a commandment at all, but rather a promise. You're not required to feel close, but if you do actually walk in these ways, if you follow these things, if you revere and you keep listening and you serve, you will get there. Attachment is possible. You can find a closeness to God. And so we kind of have two traditions happening here among the rabbis, walking like God, imitating God with an ethical framework, following Rashi's words explicitly, walking toward God in formation of a deeper spiritual relationship, follows Bachya's idea of a deeper enriched mysticism and mystical relationship. But I don't think, by the way, we have to choose. I think that we can imitate God's actions because that's how a relationship is in fact formed. Ethics are not the alternative to spirituality, they're a training ground for it. And we don't have to choose it. And I think the second one in a way explains the first, if you'll allow me to continue. And some of you heard me talk about the idea, the theology of having God in the passenger seat. And this is where it kind of landed for me when I was thinking about all of this. Think about how we all learned how to drive. Nobody handed you a manual or a book and said, goodbye, good luck, don't hit anything. Nope, somebody sat next to you. They said, check your mirrors, slow down here, put your turn signal on. Are you paying attention to the sign? Don't hit that car. I may have said that to Aiden the other day, just saying. They're not driving the car, you were, with all of the terrors involved. But you're not alone. At the beginning, you imitate, and slowly you begin to drive. You signal because you know that if they don't, the person sitting next to you is going to say something, i.e. mom. Then somewhere along the way, they learn to signal without needing to be reminded. And they start to do so naturally. Just like driving, in a way, having a conversation with God can happen slowly. Building time and trusting your voice and your presence and your spirituality before you even realize it. There you are, practicing, praying, having faith. And none of us can say exactly when it happens that you're driving down Vineville and you check the mirrors and you slow at that curve. There's that wonderful curve. Not far from your office, by the way, Glenn. And you're not thinking about your instructor at all anymore. Their wisdom has become your instinct. They're not gone, but they've become part of how you move through the world. And in many ways, I think that's what Rabbeinu Bachya's Davuk is talking about, the having God on your mind while you're still earning a living. In stage 1, God is the model. Stage 2, God is the companion. What are you showing me? The relationship. In stage 3, you don't have to ask, you drive forth. And most of us imagine God somewhere up ahead, and our task is, after all, to catch up. We have to catch up, always, or up, depending on who you ask. I wonder if the Torah imagines something, though, much closer. Not a pursuit, but an apprenticeship. In the sense that God is not ahead of you, rather beside you, which means that the acts of kindness are not an alternative to intimacy with God. They're actually how intimacy with God is built. Every time you show up at a Shiva house, every time you sit with someone who's sick, every time you have tremendous compassion for the person sitting in front of you, you're logging miles with the one in the passenger seat next to you. And let's bring us back to where we started, because I think it also matters. For when we find communities in crisis, when trust has been broken, when the pervasive voice of a national tragedy makes us all sit and wonder, when institutions have failed. And by that loss, frequently we'll notice that trust, even in a higher power, grows dim and quiet. And notice the Torah does not tell us believe. It says that we don't demand certainty. It says that we have doubt and it's the opposite of faith on that same coin. And that's okay to have doubt, but it asks us to keep walking, because that's the price of admission into that relationship with God, even in your doubt. As to keep clothing the naked, keep visiting the sick, keep comforting those mourners, and so forth. Judaism doesn't begin with certainty, it begins with practice. And from that practice, we develop trust that by keep walking, the relationship will follow. And the promise at the end of the verse, it's not just really a commandment, it's that one day we'll look up and discover we've not been alone, we never were. Achrei Adonai Eloheichem tilchu, walk and keep walking. Shabbat Shalom.